June 5, 1944, the night before D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in human history was hours away from launching. In a London apartment, a Spanish man sat at his typewriter composing what might be the most important lie ever told. Juan Pujol García typed carefully in Spanish, crafting a detailed intelligence report for his handlers in Berlin. The report explained that he had just learned from one of his agents in southern England that massive Allied forces were gathering at Dover and the surrounding areas. American divisions, British armored units, supplies and equipment suggesting imminent invasion. But, and this was crucial, this invasion force at Dover was aimed at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The Allied forces gathering in southern England represented the real invasion force. Anything happening elsewhere was just a diversion. Juan finished typing, encoded the message using his German-issued cipher, and transmitted it through his radio operator to Abwehr headquarters in Madrid, then forwarded to Berlin. German intelligence officers received the transmission with satisfaction. This confirmed what they already suspected. Their most trusted agent in Britain, the brilliant spy who had never been wrong in 4 years of reporting, was telling them that Normandy, which would be attacked the following morning, was not the real invasion. It was a feint. The real invasion would come at Calais weeks later. Based partly on this intelligence, German High Command kept massive forces stationed at Pas-de-Calais for weeks after D-Day began, waiting for the real invasion that Agent Arabelle, Juan's German code name, had promised was coming. Those forces never moved to Normandy. Their absence allowed Allied forces to establish their beachhead, break out from the beaches, and begin the liberation of Europe. Juan Pujol García had just helped win World War II by lying more successfully than anyone in history. This is his story. Juan Pujol García was born on February 14, 1912, in Barcelona, Spain. His family was middle class, comfortable but not wealthy. His father ran a dyeing factory. His mother was a traditional Spanish housewife focused on Catholic values and family. Juan grew up during turbulent times in Spanish history: political instability, economic problems, rising tensions between left and right that would eventually explode into civil war. As a young man, Juan was unremarkable. He was not brilliant academically, not athletic, not particularly ambitious. He tried various careers, worked in his father's factory, studied chicken farming, managed a cinema, started a small poultry business. Nothing went particularly well. By his late 20s, Juan Pujol García seemed destined for comfortable mediocrity as a small business owner in Barcelona. Then the Spanish Civil War began in 1936, shattering Juan's comfortable life and forcing him to confront questions about politics, ideology, and what he believed in. The Spanish Civil War was brutal. Nationalists under General Franco, supported by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, fought against Republicans supported by the Soviet Union and international volunteers. The war killed hundreds of thousands. Civilians were massacred. Cities were bombed. Atrocities were committed by both sides. Juan was conscripted into the Republican Army in 1936. He served reluctantly, with no enthusiasm for military life or Republican ideology. He saw the brutality of both sides: Republican execution squads killing priests and landowners, nationalist forces massacring civilians and burning villages. When Republican forces retreated in 1938, Juan deserted. He obtained false papers showing he had served with the nationalists, then deserted from that side too. He spent months hiding in Barcelona, pretending to be a loyal Francoist while secretly hoping the Republic would somehow win. By war's end in 1939, Juan had developed strong political convictions despite or because of his attempts to avoid the conflict. He hated totalitarianism. He hated fascism, communism, and all ideologies that justified violence against civilians. He had watched both sides commit atrocities in the name of their grand political theories. But he especially hated the Nazis. Germany had bombed Spanish cities like Guernica, testing weapons that would later devastate Europe. German forces had helped Franco win, establishing a fascist dictatorship that would rule Spain for decades. Juan blamed Germany for Spain's suffering. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, starting World War II, Juan knew he had to do something. But what could one unemployed poultry farmer from Barcelona do against the Nazi war machine, early 1940. Juan visited the British embassy in Madrid. Britain was at war with Germany. Perhaps they needed agents in neutral Spain. Perhaps they would value an idealistic Spaniard willing to spy against fascism. The British intelligence officer listened politely to Juan's offer, then rejected him completely. Britain had no use for untrained amateur volunteers with no qualifications. If Britain needed Spanish agents, they would recruit experienced intelligence professionals, not unemployed businessmen with vague anti-fascist sentiments. Juan tried again. He visited several times, making his case, explaining his hatred of Nazism, offering his services. Each time, the British sent him away. They were not interested. Juan was frustrated but not discouraged. He began developing a plan. If Britain wouldn't hire him as a spy, he would become a spy independently, establish his credentials with the Germans, then approach Britain with proof of his value. It was an insane plan. Approaching German intelligence without training, without British support, without any idea what he was doing, would likely get him recruited as a genuine German agent or killed as a suspected double agent. Juan didn't care. He was determined to fight against fascism. If this was the only way, he would do it. Summer 1940, Juan approached the German embassy in Madrid. He explained that he was a Spanish businessman with fascist sympathies who admired Germany's military successes. He had connections in Britain through his former business dealings. He could travel to Britain and report valuable intelligence. The Germans were interested but cautious. They interviewed Juan multiple times, checking his background, testing his story. Eventually, they decided to take a chance. They gave Juan a basic crash course in espionage tradecraft codes, invisible ink, how to recognize military installations, what information Berlin wanted. Then they gave him money, instructions to travel to Britain, and orders to begin reporting immediately upon arrival. There was one small problem. Juan had absolutely no intention of actually going to Britain, and even if he wanted to, he couldn't. British authorities weren't issuing travel visas to Spanish nationals, especially not to suspicious characters claiming business reasons for visiting Britain in the middle of a war. Juan needed to fake being in Britain while actually staying in Portugal. He needed to create an entire fictional spy network, fictional observations, fictional intelligence reports, and make them convincing enough that German intelligence wouldn't realize they were being deceived. It should have been impossible. Juan had never been to Britain. He didn't speak English fluently. He had no intelligence training. He had no support network. He was completely alone in Lisbon with a typewriter and an audacious plan to fool the German military intelligence service. What Juan did have was imagination, attention to detail, and obsessive dedication to making his fictional reports seem absolutely authentic. Juan rented a small apartment in Lisbon and began his work. He bought British newspapers, magazines, tourist guides, railway timetables, cinema newsreels. He studied everything he could find about Britain geography, culture, military terminology, current events. His first reports to Berlin were cautious. He claimed to have arrived in Britain successfully. He described his journey, his accommodation in London, his initial observations. The reports were vague enough to avoid obvious errors, but detailed enough to seem authentic. Berlin responded enthusiastically. They wanted more information: military installations, troop movements, naval facilities, aircraft production. German intelligence was hungry for any information about Britain, and Agent Arabelle, Juan's German code name, seemed willing and capable. Juan faced enormous challenges. He had to invent plausible military intelligence about a country he had never visited, in sufficient detail to convince professional intelligence officers, without making mistakes that would expose him as a fraud. He made mistakes. Many mistakes. Early reports contained errors that should have alerted the Germans. He reported that Glaswegians would do anything for a litre of wine. Scots drink whiskey, not wine. Described soldiers willing to die for a glass of wine. British soldiers drank beer. Got currency conversions wrong. Misidentified military ranks and organization. German intelligence either didn't notice these errors or attributed them to Agent Arabelle being Spanish with imperfect knowledge of British culture. They kept requesting more intelligence, kept paying more money, kept treating Juan as a valuable asset. Juan realized he needed to expand his operation. One agent reporting from Britain might seem suspicious if his information was too comprehensive. He needed to create additional fictional agents, building an entire spy network that would make his intelligence reports more plausible. Over the following months, Juan invented multiple fictional sub-agents. Each had detailed backgrounds, personalities, motivations, and limitations. Agent 1, a KLM airline employee based in London who traveled frequently and could report on various locations. Portuguese national, pro-German sympathies due to business connections. Agent 2, a Swiss businessman who operated throughout Britain, conducting commercial transactions that allowed him to observe military installations and industrial facilities. Agent 3, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow who hated British imperialism and was willing to spy for payment. Juan created these characters with the care of a novelist writing fictional characters. He gave them consistent personalities, realistic limitations, believable motivations. When Agent 3 reported information from Scotland, Juan had to research Scottish geography, climate, culture, dialect in enough detail that German intelligence would believe his fictional Venezuelan student actually lived in Glasgow. Some agents were more productive than others, just like a real spy network. Some provided excellent intelligence frequently. Others submitted occasional reports when opportunities arose. Some proved unreliable and had to be dropped from the network. Juan even invented sub-agents for his agents, an entire second tier of fictional spies. Agent 3 in Glasgow recruited Agent 301, a fictional RAF officer willing to betray Britain for ideological reasons. Agent 2 recruited Agent 2.1, a pilot in the RAF. By late 1941, Juan's fictional spy network included 7 agents operating across Britain. Berlin was paying him substantial amounts of money to maintain this network. German intelligence treasured Agent Arabelle as one of their most productive and valuable spies in Britain. And Juan was doing all of this from a small apartment in Lisbon without ever setting foot in Britain. Every single agent, every single piece of intelligence, every single observation was completely fabricated. He was conning the entire German military intelligence service through nothing but imagination and typewriter. But he still hadn't achieved his original goal: getting Britain's attention. British intelligence eventually became aware of Agent Arabelle through intercepted German communications. Bletchley Park, Britain's code-breaking centre, had cracked German Enigma codes. British intelligence could read German Abwehr communications. They noticed increasing references to Agent Arabelle, a supposedly brilliant spy operating in Britain, sending detailed intelligence reports to Madrid. MI5 was concerned. Who was this agent? How had he penetrated British security? Why hadn't they identified him? They searched desperately for Agent Arabelle, investigating anyone who might match his profile, anyone who might be transmitting intelligence to Germany. They found nothing. No suspicious radio transmissions from Britain to Spain. No obvious German agents matching Arabelle's described activities. Eventually, through careful analysis of Arabelle's reports and German responses, British intelligence realized something extraordinary. Agent Arabelle wasn't in Britain at all. He was somewhere in Portugal, probably Lisbon, fabricating intelligence based on publicly available information and sending it to Germany as if he were operating inside Britain. This was interesting. This was potentially valuable. If this Spanish fraudster had successfully convinced German intelligence that he was a productive agent in Britain, perhaps Britain could recruit him and turn his fictional network into a weapon of strategic deception. In April 1942, British intelligence finally contacted Juan in Lisbon. They explained that they knew what he was doing. They were impressed. Would he be willing to move to Britain and work for MI5, continuing his deception operation, but now under British control? Juan agreed immediately. This was exactly what he had been working toward for 2 years. Finally, he could fight against fascism with British support and resources. In April 1942, Juan Pujol García moved to Britain and began working with MI5. The British gave him a new code name, Agent Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, because of his brilliant acting ability in creating and maintaining his fictional roles. The greatest deception operation in military history was about to reach its full potential. When Juan arrived in Britain in April 1942, MI5 assigned him handler Thomas Harris, a half-Spanish art dealer who spoke perfect Spanish and understood Juan's personality perfectly. Harris and Juan developed an extraordinary partnership. Harris had intelligence training and understood how German intelligence operated. Juan had imagination, creativity, and instinctive understanding of how to create believable fictional narratives. Together, they transformed Juan's amateur deception into a sophisticated strategic weapon. They reviewed Juan's existing fictional network, identifying which agents were most valuable and which should be maintained. They created new agents with even more detailed backgrounds. They established consistent reporting patterns that seemed natural and authentic. Most importantly, they began mixing false intelligence with truth. Juan's early reports from Lisbon had been entirely fabricated. Now, MI5 could provide actual intelligence troop movements, military installations, naval operations, and Juan could report this information to Berlin through his fictional network. The intelligence MI5 gave Juan was carefully calibrated. It was real enough to be verified by German reconnaissance and other sources, establishing Agent Garbo's reliability. But it was either outdated by the time Berlin received it, or it was information Britain wanted Germany to know. This combination of truth and fiction made Juan's reports extraordinarily credible. German intelligence could verify some of his information through independent sources. When everything they could check turned out to be accurate, they assumed everything else Agent Garbo reported was also reliable. German trust in Agent Garbo grew rapidly. By late 1942, he was considered the Abwehr's most productive and trustworthy agent in Britain. Berlin paid him enormous amounts of money. They gave him additional equipment and resources. They treated his intelligence as top priority. With MI5's support, Juan expanded his fictional spy network dramatically. By 1943, he controlled 27 fictional agents and sub-agents, each with detailed backstories, personalities, and capabilities. Some of the most important fictional agents included Agent 4, a waiter in a restaurant frequented by American officers, could overhear conversations about military planning and troop movements, based in London. Agent 7, a former seaman now working in the Ministry of Information's censorship department, had access to information about civilian morale and some military communications. Welsh, devoted socialist who hated the British government. Agent 7 Tata 2, a Welshman recruited by Agent 7, working in the ministries in London with access to classified documents, strongly anti-British with fascist sympathies. Agent 7-4, recruited by Agent 7, American sergeant in U.S. Army communications stationed in Britain, motivated by money and willing to betray military secrets. Each agent reported independently with their own personality and style. Agent 3 in Glasgow sent enthusiastic detailed reports. Agent 4 was more cautious and limited in what he could observe. Agent 7 was ideologically motivated and sometimes included political commentary in his reports. Juan and Harris wrote thousands of pages of reports, crafting each message to match the personality of the fictional agent supposedly writing it. They maintained consistent character voices, realistic limitations, and believable mistakes that made the fictional agents seem like real people. They even created personal dramas. Agent 7's wife got sick. Agent 3 complained about rationing and wartime restrictions. Agent 4 got promoted to head waiter, giving him access to more senior officers. These personal touches made the fictional agents feel authentic to German intelligence officers reading their reports. Managing 27 fictional agents required enormous effort. Juan worked essentially full-time with Harris and a small MI5 team, crafting hundreds of messages monthly, maintaining consistency, avoiding contradictions, and ensuring each fictional agent behaved authentically. They maintained detailed files on each fictional agent biographies, reporting patterns, capabilities, relationships with other agents, ongoing situations. When Agent 3 reported from Glasgow, they had to remember what Agent 3 knew and didn't know, what his personality was like, what limitations he had. They developed elaborate cover stories for why certain information wasn't reported. If Berlin asked Agent Garbo to investigate something, he would have his agents attempt the investigation, but encounter realistic obstacles. Military areas were too heavily guarded. Sources became suspicious. Information was classified and inaccessible. These limitations made the network seem real. A fake spy network that never encountered problems would be suspicious. A network where agents sometimes failed, where information was limited, where security sometimes prevented access that seemed authentic. Financial arrangements were also complex. German intelligence paid Agent Garbo substantial amounts to maintain his network. The money was real. MI5 had to account for it, create paper trails showing payments to fictional agents, maintain banking records that would withstand German scrutiny if they ever investigated. Despite careful planning, the operation nearly failed several times. In November 1942, Agent Garbo reported that a large Allied convoy was preparing to leave Liverpool, heading somewhere important. This was true. The convoy was part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. Juan sent this message late at night after German intelligence offices in Madrid had closed for the day. The message arrived too late for Germans to act on it. The convoy departed, the invasion succeeded, and German intelligence couldn't blame Agent Garbo because he had reported it. They just hadn't received and processed his message in time. Berlin was furious, not at Agent Garbo, but at their own Madrid station for not being available to receive urgent intelligence. They apologized to Agent Garbo and promised to maintain 24-hour communications going forward. This near disaster actually strengthened Agent Garbo's credibility. He had reported accurate intelligence about a major operation. The failure wasn't his fault, it was German bureaucracy. Berlin trusted him even more afterward. Another close call came when German intelligence asked Agent Garbo to investigate something that didn't exist. Rather than risk exposure by claiming to find non-existent facilities, Juan had his fictional agents report back that they couldn't find what Berlin was asking about, that perhaps intelligence from other sources was incorrect. These moments of failure paradoxically increased German trust. Agent Garbo admitted when he couldn't find information, when investigations failed, when he didn't know something. This honesty made his positive reports more credible. Agent Garbo was part of a larger British counterintelligence operation called the Double Cross System, XEX Committee. Every German agent in Britain had been either captured and turned into double agents, or they were fictional creations like Agent Garbo's network. Germany thought they had dozens of agents operating throughout Britain. In reality, British intelligence controlled every single one of them. Every piece of intelligence Germany received from Britain was information Britain wanted them to have. This was an extraordinary achievement in counterintelligence. It meant Britain could feed Germany false information while ensuring no German spies were sending accurate intelligence back to Berlin. Agent Garbo was the crown jewel of this system. His network was the largest, most productive, and most trusted by German intelligence. As D-Day approached, he would become the most important piece of Britain's strategic deception plan. By early 1944, Allied planners were developing Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. The invasion would land at Normandy beaches, establishing a beachhead and driving inland toward Germany. Success required surprise. If Germany knew where and when the invasion would land, they could concentrate forces and slaughter Allied troops on the beaches. If Germany was uncertain about the landing location, they would have to spread forces along the entire French coast, weakening defenses everywhere. Allied intelligence developed Operation Fortitude, a massive deception plan to convince Germany that the invasion would land at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. Calais was closer to Britain, closer to Germany, and seemed like the logical invasion point. The plan included fake army units, dummy tanks and aircraft, false radio traffic, and most importantly, intelligence reports from trusted agents confirming that Allied forces were preparing to invade at Calais. Agent Garbo would be the key piece of this deception. His network was perfectly positioned. His credibility with German intelligence was unmatched. If Agent Garbo reported that Allied forces were preparing to invade at Calais, Germany would believe it. Juan and Harris began preparing the greatest lie in military history. Operation Fortitude was perhaps the most elaborate military deception in history. It involved two main elements: Fortitude North, fake invasion preparations in Scotland threatening Norway, and Fortitude South, fake invasion preparations in southeast England threatening Calais. Fortitude South was the crucial element. The plan created an entirely fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly based in southeast England under command of General Patton. This fake army included 11 divisions, approximately 150,000 soldiers with tanks, artillery, supply units, and all support necessary for major invasion. In reality, FUSAG didn't exist. British and American forces created the illusion through dummy tanks, aircraft and landing craft visible to German reconnaissance radio traffic, mimicking a large military formation. Official documents referring to FUSAG units and operations, intelligence reports from double agents confirming FUSAG's existence, and invasion preparations. Agent Garbo played the central role. His fictional agents reported detailed observations of FUSAG forces throughout southeast England. They described seeing American divisions arriving, tanks being loaded for transport, landing craft gathering in Dover and nearby ports. They overheard conversations between American officers discussing invasion planning. These reports matched what German reconnaissance could observe: the dummy equipment, the radio signals, the general build-up of forces in southeast England. When Agent Garbo's intelligence corroborated German reconnaissance, it confirmed both sources were accurate. Juan and Harris crafted these reports meticulously. They provided exact details, unit numbers, division insignia, equipment types, locations, all coordinated with the physical deception elements so German intelligence could verify the information. The real invasion began early morning June 6, 1944, at Normandy beaches. German forces were surprised but began responding, bringing up reserves to contain the beachhead. German high command was uncertain. Was this the main invasion, or was it a diversion for a larger invasion elsewhere? Several factors suggested it might be a feint. Normandy was farther from Britain than Calais. Normandy was farther from Germany, requiring longer supply lines. Allied forces at Normandy seemed smaller than expected. Intelligence suggested massive forces still remained in southeast England. In the hours and days following D-Day, Agent Garbo sent a series of messages that fundamentally shaped German strategic decisions. On June 6, just hours after the landings began, Juan transmitted an urgent message reporting that his agents had confirmed FUSAG remained in southeast England, fully equipped and ready for deployment. The Normandy invasion appeared to be a diversion, drawing German forces away from Calais. The real invasion, the main attack with the bulk of Allied forces, would come at Calais within days. This message arrived too late to affect the initial landings, which was intentional. MI5 timed it so Berlin received the intelligence after D-Day began, but could still influence German strategic response. German high command faced a critical decision. Should they send all available reserves to Normandy to crush the beachhead? Or should they hold forces at Calais in case this intelligence about the real invasion coming there was accurate? They believed Agent Garbo. They held massive forces at Calais, 15 divisions, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tanks, artillery, everything needed to repel an invasion. These forces stayed at Calais for weeks, waiting for the invasion that Agent Garbo had promised was coming. Those forces never moved to Normandy. Their absence allowed Allied forces to establish their beachhead, break out from the beaches, and begin the liberation of Europe. On June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, German intelligence sent Agent Garbo an unusual message. They thanked him for his exceptional intelligence work. They expressed regret that his June 6 warning about Calais had arrived too late to prevent the Normandy landings. They praised his analysis as the most accurate intelligence they had received from any source, and they recommended him for the Iron Cross, second class, Germany's significant military decoration. Agent Garbo had successfully convinced German intelligence that he had tried to warn them, that Normandy was a diversion, that the real invasion was still coming at Calais. He had not only maintained his cover as a loyal German agent, he had been honored for his deception. The Iron Cross was awarded but not publicly announced for security reasons. Juan Pujol García, Spanish anti-fascist who had spent 4 years lying to Nazi Germany, had received a Nazi military decoration for his lies. In 1945, after the war ended, Britain awarded Juan the Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, for his intelligence work. He became the only person in World War II to receive military honors from both sides of the conflict. As Allied forces advanced through France in late 1944 and early 1945, maintaining the fictional spy network became difficult. Many of Agent Garbo's fictional agents would realistically be evacuated, displaced by advancing armies, or cut off from communications. Juan and Harris began gradually dismantling the network. Some agents were evacuated to Spain or neutral countries. Others went silent as fighting disrupted communications. Some were described as being killed in Allied bombing raids or caught in combat zones. By early 1945, as Germany's defeat became inevitable, the network was largely inactive. German intelligence still occasionally requested information, still trusted Agent Garbo, but the operational need was disappearing. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Agent Garbo's work was complete. He had spent 4 years lying to Germany, inventing 27 fictional agents, creating thousands of false intelligence reports, and ultimately helping win the war through deception. After the war, Juan wanted anonymity. He had been successful precisely because nobody knew who he was. Spanish fascist authorities might prosecute him for working against Germany, Spain's ally. German agents who escaped might seek revenge. British intelligence agreed to keep his identity secret. His MI5 file remained classified for decades. His role in D-Day deception wasn't publicly acknowledged. Most people who worked in Allied intelligence didn't know about Agent Garbo, and those who did know weren't allowed to discuss it. Juan moved to Angola in West Africa, then to Venezuela, living quietly under assumed names. He ran businesses, raised a family, tried to build a peaceful life after years of living a lie. For decades, the world didn't know about Juan Pujol García. The greatest spy of World War II was unknown, unremarked, living in comfortable obscurity. That changed in the 1980s when the story of Agent Garbo was finally declassified. In 1984, British author Nigel West published a book about British double agents in World War II, including the story of Agent Garbo. The book identified Juan Pujol García as the man behind the legendary spy. By this time, Juan was 72 years old, living in Venezuela. When British historians contacted him, he was initially reluctant to discuss his wartime work. He had spent 40 years avoiding publicity, staying anonymous, keeping his secrets. Eventually, he agreed to tell his story. He gave interviews, wrote his memoirs, met with military historians. The full extent of his deception operation became public for the first time. The response was extraordinary. Military historians recognized Agent Garbo as possibly the most successful intelligence deception operation ever conducted. His D-Day deception may have saved thousands of Allied lives by keeping German forces away from Normandy. In 1984, Juan visited Britain for the first time since the war. He met with veterans, attended ceremonies, and was recognized publicly for his contributions to Allied victory. Prince Philip personally thanked him. British officials who had worked with MI5 shared stories about the legendary Agent Garbo they had heard about but never known was Juan. He returned to Venezuela satisfied that his story was finally acknowledged. How did Juan Pujol García fool the entire German intelligence service for 4 years with completely fabricated intelligence? Several psychological factors enabled his success. Confirmation bias. German intelligence wanted to believe they had effective agents in Britain. When Agent Garbo sent intelligence that confirmed their assumptions, they accepted it readily. When information contradicted their beliefs, they dismissed it or rationalized it. The consistency illusion. Juan maintained absolute consistency in his fictional network. Each agent had a distinct personality that remained stable over years. This consistency made them feel like real people rather than fabrications. Mixing truth with fiction. Once MI5 began supplying some accurate information, German intelligence could verify some of Agent Garbo's reports. This verification made them trust everything he reported, even the false intelligence. Cultural misunderstandings. German intelligence officers reading Agent Garbo's reports didn't always understand British culture perfectly. Small errors in Juan's reports seemed like foreign agent mistakes rather than fabrication errors. Organizational limitations. German Abwehr was not as competent as its reputation suggested. Internal competition, bureaucratic problems, and ideological constraints limited their ability to critically evaluate intelligence. They wanted good news and uncritically accepted reports suggesting Allied plans could be predicted. The big lie principle, Juan's deception, was so audacious. 27 fictional agents, thousands of fake reports, years of sustained lies that German intelligence never seriously considered it might all be fabricated. The scale of the deception made it seem impossible, therefore it must be real. Historians continue debating how much Agent Garbo's deception actually affected D-Day's outcome. Some argue it was decisive, keeping German reserves away from Normandy at the critical moment. Others suggest German forces were stretched so thin that they couldn't have reinforced Normandy effectively regardless. What's clear is that Operation Fortitude, with Agent Garbo as its central element, succeeded beyond expectations. German High Command genuinely believed Fusag existed and threatened Calais. They held massive forces there for weeks after D-Day. Those forces' absence from Normandy gave Allied armies time to establish their beachhead. Even conservative estimates suggest Agent Garbo's deception saved thousands of Allied lives and shortened the war by weeks or months. More optimistic assessments suggest his work was one of the decisive factors in Allied victory. Juan Pujol García paid personal costs for his deception work. He spent 4 years living a lie, maintaining fictional personalities, never able to relax or make mistakes. The psychological strain was enormous. He worked constantly, crafting reports, maintaining consistency, avoiding contradictions. His relationship with his wife suffered. She knew about his work, but couldn't fully understand the stress and danger. They eventually divorced after the war. Living under assumed identities in Angola and Venezuela meant isolation. He couldn't discuss his wartime experiences, couldn't connect with other veterans, couldn't share the most significant accomplishment of his life. When his story finally became public in the 1980s, Juan expressed mixed feelings. He was proud of his contribution, but also relieved the deception was over. He had carried the secret for 40 years, unable to discuss it even with family. He lived another 14 years after his story became public, dying in Caracas, Venezuela, in October 1988 at age 76. Today, Agent Garbo is recognized as one of history's greatest spies. His story is taught in intelligence training courses as an example of successful strategic deception. The operation demonstrated several intelligence principles that remain relevant. Deception works best when mixed with truth. Psychological understanding of your opponent is as important as information. Consistency and detail create believability. Organizational limitations can be exploited. Audacious plans succeed precisely because they seem impossible. Modern intelligence services still use deception operations inspired by techniques Juan pioneered. The basic principle, feeding false information to enemies through channels they trust, remains effective. Perhaps most importantly, Juan's story demonstrates that individuals can make extraordinary differences. One Spanish man with a typewriter and imagination fundamentally affected history's largest military conflict. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained in intelligence, had no special qualifications. He just had conviction, creativity, and determination. Juan Pujol Garcia's story is almost unbelievable. If it appeared in a novel or film, readers would complain it was too absurd, too unrealistic, too ridiculous to be taken seriously. But it's all true. A man really did invent 27 fictional spies, fool Nazi intelligence for 4 years, receive military decorations from both sides, and help win World War II by lying from his apartment. His story reminds us that truth is often stranger than fiction, that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things through creativity and determination. That imagination and intelligence can be as powerful as armies and weapons. In an era of industrial warfare with millions of soldiers and massive firepower, the outcome of World War II's most important battle was influenced by one Spanish man sitting at a typewriter, typing lies. Magnificent lies, brilliant lies, world-changing lies. Juan Pujol García lied his way into history, and we're all better off because he did.